Out of the village, out of the thatched and clutching shires, out of the grave and furrow, furrow and grave, where his sword first tried the last cruel dances of childhood, and awoke to the shires, forever retreating, his greatness a marsh-fire, the banked flight of the kingfisher always above him. Now Huma walked upon roses to the wilderness, where Paladin bade him to turn, and there in the loud tunnel of knives he grew in unblemished violence, in yearning, stunned into himself by a deafening gauntlet of voices. It was there and then that the white stag found him, at the end of a journey planned from the shores of creation, and all time staggered at the forest edge, where Huma, haunted and starving, drew his bow, thanking the gods for their bounty and keeping, then saw in the ranged wood, in the first silence, the dazed heart symbol, the rack of antlers resplendent. He lowered the bow, and the world resumed. Then Huma followed the stag, its tangle of antlers receding, as a memory of young light, as the talons of birds ascending. The mountain crouched before them. Nothing would change now. The 3 moons stalked in the sky, and the long night tumbled in shadows. It was morning when they reached the grove, the lap of the mountain, where the stag departed. Nor did Huma follow, knowing the end of this journey was nothing but green, and the promise of green that endured in the eyes of the woman before him. And holy the days he drew near her, holy the air that carried his words of endearment, his forgotten songs, and the rapt moons knelt on the great mountain. Still she eluded him, bright and retreating as marsh fire, nameless and lovely, more lovely because she was nameless, as they learned that the world, the dazzling shelves of the air, the wilderness itself, were plain and diminished things to the heart's thicket. At the end of the days, she told him her secret. For she was not of woman, nor was she mortal, but daughter and heiress from a line of dragons. For Huma, the sky turned indifferent, cluttered by moons. The brief life of the grass mocked him, mocked his fathers, and the thorned light bristled on the gliding mountain. But nameless she tendered a hope not in her keeping, that Paladin only might answer, that through his enduring wisdom she might step from forever, and there in her silver arms the promise of the grove might rise and flourish. For that wisdom Huma prayed, and the stag returned, and east, through the desolate fields, through ash, through cinders and blood, the harvest of dragons, traveled Huma, cradled by dreams of the silver dragon, the stag perpetual, a signal before him. At last the eventual harbor, a temple so far to the east that it lay where the east was ending. There Paladin appeared, in a pool of stars and glory, announcing that of all choices, one most terrible had fallen to Huma. For Paladin knew that the heart is a nest of yearnings, that we can travel forever toward light, becoming what we can never be. For the bride of Huma could step into the devouring sun. Together they would return to the thatched shires and leave behind the secret of the lance, the world, unpeopled in darkness, wed to the dragons. Or Huma could take on the Dragonlance, cleansing all Kryn of death and invasion, of the green paths of his love. The hardest of choices, and Huma remembered how the wilderness cloistered and baptized his first thoughts beneath the sheltering sun, and now, as the black moon wheeled and pivoted, drawing the air and the substance from Kryn, from the things of Kryn, from the grove, from the mountain, from the abandoned shires, he would sleep, he would send it all away, for the choosing was all of the pain, and the choices were heat on the hand when the arm has been severed. But she came to him, weeping and luminous, in a landscape of dreams, where he saw the world collapse and renew on the glint of the lance. In her farewell lay collapse and renewal. Through his doomed veins, the horizon burst. He took up the Dragonlance. He took up the story. The pale heat rushed through his rising arm, and the sun and the 3 moons, waiting for wonders, hung in the sky together. To the west Huma rode, to the high Clarist's tower, on the back of the silver dragon, and the path of their flight crossed over a desolate country, where the dead walked only, mouthing the names of dragons. And the men in the tower, surrounded and riddled by dragons, by the cries of the dying, the roar in the ravenous air, awaited the unspeakable silence, awaited far worse, in fear that the crash of the senses would end in a moment of nothing, where the mind lies down with its losses and darkness. But the winding of Huma's horn in the distance danced on the battlements. All of Solamnia lifted its face to the eastern sky, and the dragons wheeled to the highest air, believing some terrible change had come. From out of their tumult of wings, out of the chaos of dragons, out of the heart of nothing, the mother of night, a swirl and a blankness of colors, swooped to the east, into the stare of the sun, and the sky collapsed into silver and blankness. On the ground Huma lay, at his side a woman, her silver skin broken, the promise of green released from the gifts of her eyes. She whispered her name as the Queen of Darkness banked in the sky above Huma. She descended, the mother of night, and from the loft of the battlements, men saw shadows boil on the colorless dive of her wings. A hovel of thatch and rushes, the heart of a wilderness. A lost silver light spattered in terrible crimson. And then, from the center of shadows, came a depth in which all darkness itself was a glimmer, denying all air, all light, all shadows. And thrusting his lance into emptiness, Huma fell to the sweetness of death, into abiding sunlight. Through the lance, through the dear might and brotherhood of those who must walk to the end of the breath and the senses, and the long lands blossomed in balance and music. Stunned in new freedom, stunned by the brightness and colors, by the harped blessing of the holy winds, the knights carried Huma, they carried the Dragonlance to the grove in the lap of the mountain. When they returned to the grove in pilgrimage, in homage, the lance, the armor, the Dragonbane himself had vanished to the day's eye. But the night of the full moons, red and silver, shines down on the hills, on the forms of a man and a woman, shimmering steel and silver, silver and steel, above the village, over the thatches and nurturing shires.